Morning, everybody. Welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. Sorry for the brief delay, but I think you'll find that this is a conversation that you're going to find extraordinarily interesting. We are delighted to welcome today His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, excuse my pronunciation, who was appointed the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qatar in 2016 and the Deputy Prime Minister in 2017. He is responsible for all of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issues, including planning, implementing foreign policy, and he's here for a series of high-level conversations with the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the White House that we are looking forward to hearing all of the details of. What's going to happen today? The minister will join us at the podium for a brief statement, and then he's going to sit down on the stage with our resident or visiting fellow, excuse me, I'm getting your title wrong, the easier one, with our visiting scholar Andrew Bowen for a conversation, which will then open up to some questions from the audience. There's a lot to talk about here today. Qatar has been at the center of, I think, what we will all agree is an ugly disagreement among GCC countries and others, one that has really divided traditional U.S. allies and has sowed some divisions, I think, even within the U.S. government. So we are really very interested to hear your perspective, Mr. Minister. Why don't you be careful on the step, and if you would just join us on the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Danny, for hosting me here, and thank you for inviting me today. I hope that today I'll have the opportunity to shed the light on some of the issues in the Middle East and the turmoil which is taking place in our region, which is not affecting only the interest of the region and the state of Qatar, but affecting also the U.S. interest. And I hope that I can propose some ideas for a way forward. So the U.S. and Qatar have been allies for 45 years. We have dozens of agreements that memorialize our commitment to each other. This week, our country met for a historic strategic dialogue and signed 5 additional agreements, including defending the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure for energy, strengthening trade, investment, and technology, developing international law enforcement to stop human trafficking, and continue joint defense commitments. The Qatari delegation could not have been welcomed with wider arms. The US and Qatar have a unique partnership. When the US was searching for a home for its troops in the Middle East, Qatar welcomed them. Today, Qatar hosts the largest US military foreign air base in the world. In Qatar, 11,000 US troops, thousands of US teachers and students, and hundreds of US-owned companies are living and working in Qatar. Qatar and the US are strategically located. We are surrounded by powerful players in the Middle East. Some of these nations are bent on intimidation, aggression, and dangerous flirtation with war. Make no mistake, these powers are feuding for domination, taking as prisoners not just the neighbors they bully. The suffering inflicted by these power-hungry forces, not limited to the starvation and devastation in places like Yemen, Syria, and Somalia. The well-being of citizens within these dominating regimes is also being sacrificed in the power grab. The illegal blockade started last year against Qatar is one of many instruments of sabotage intended to bully my country into submission. The world is discovering that the blockading states will stop at nothing. Illegal market manipulation, different kinds of aggressions, humanitarian assaults, silencing dissenters, weaponizing propaganda, and undermining the global fight against terrorism. These intimidation methods threaten the success of all the agreements and investments between Qatar and the United States. There is a silver lining of this blockade. Qatar has been able to show the resilience and survive under siege. Other countries in the Middle East might not be able to withstand the trial of an attack. as we have seen in example after example across the region. Qatar joins the US passion for restoring regional security to the Middle East. The regional and short-term danger of aggression is happening before our eyes, along a spectrum of devastation. The worldwide and long-term danger of aggression will eventually reach countries around the globe, because these rulers will stop at nothing. Intentional international destabilization of the energy and financial markets, and worse, by laying the groundwork for the next generation of terrorism. Terrorism flourishes in oppressive, closed regimes, where the needs and rights of the citizens are not met. While many reckless leaders surrounding us double down on hidden and oppressive means of governance, Qatar and many other nations in the Middle East hope to keep developing into nations that can provide justice and security to its citizens. As I told Secretary Tillerson and Mattis, Qatar sees the US as a critical part of that vision. Ending the turmoil in the Middle East will take further leadership. Joint cooperation from all countries in the Middle East is necessary to restoring lasting security to the region. Qatar and the US have been fighting terrorism together for many years. We agree that terrorism must not only be destroyed through military efforts, but also by lifting up oppressed with vision of openness and hope through lasting social transformations. We have warned repeatedly that imposing repression over reform and development, using the law of power instead of the power of law, is detrimental to the global counter-terrorism efforts. The US, Qatar, and the other 72 members of the coalition against ISIS have spent years crushing this evil. We don't want to find ourselves in the same situation again and again. We need to work together to completely end terrorism financing, recruitment, propaganda, and extremist ideologies. Wise leadership means put aside personal feelings to help the good of the people. It is Qatar hope that GCC can be rebuilt. The citizens of Qatar are forgiving and resilient people. We wish for unity. We can't ignore the historic bond between the countries of the GCC and the shared family, cultural, and financial ties that can actually make us stronger. Qatar hopes for a restored GCC, which is more transparent and based on shared interest like trade and security. This restored GCC would need to have a clear process for raising and resolving differences, would need to be void of forced compliance regarding foreign policy and decision concerning domestic affairs, would need to be governed by reason over impulse, and would need to serve the best interest of all its members. Regarding the greater Middle East region, we cannot rebuild these devastated areas unless more diplomatic pressure is put on power-hungry players, and a holistic security plan is established across the region. This security plan must find common ground, include an arbitration mechanism that gives small and large nations equal protection, and provide binding consequences for those who create a crisis and threaten security. I hope the international community will join me in calling for an immediate regional strategic dialogue to agree upon common principles of coexistence, which can serve as a foundation to healing and ultimately prosperity for the region. Thank you.
Thank you again for being here at AEI. I wanted to kind of touch on a point that you stressed about kind of the future of the GCC. We look at, like, you were in Kuwait
December. And I believe this was the first time yourself and His Highness were with your GCC counterparts in many months, and the meeting ended quite abruptly. Has there been, and there's certainly since your visit here, has there been any indications of you seeing any optimism on the road to a potential kind of resolution or dialogue, whether that be convened by President Trump or more specifically convened by Kuwait, or are we still at an impasse?
Well, Qatar remains calling for the dialogue and supporting the initiative of the Emir of Kuwait when he offered to mediate between the Gulf countries, and also accepted the invitation which was issued by the president to call all the GCC members to Camp David in order to see a solution for this. But when you have a conflict between parties and one of the parties is unwilling to engage in dialogue or unwilling to engage toward a solution, then this dialogue, even if it will result in anything, it won't result a positive results because of the bad intention behind the willingness. The GCC summit was an opportunity, what we believed in Qatar, that at least for the first time the leaders will see each other face to face. And we got surprised at the last moment that they have cancelled their attendance and downgraded their representation to the GCC meeting. So for us, we have done everything in our hands, showing the goodwill toward the solution, but it needs a response from the other side, which is not there yet.
And do you think that like just kind of the number of issues that are typically have been raised by your neighbors have been everything from media to interference in Qatar's interference, they allege, in the neighbors' affairs since 2014. That if there is a dialogue point, as you said, that it does not appear that there is much momentum or will on your neighbor's side for such dialogue, that do you see that this as a potential opportunity that in light of President Trump's kind of first the phone call with the Emir earlier this month, and then potentially hosting a Camp David-style summit later in the spring, does this give a window to at least find an opportunity for Doha to have a proactive window to kind of find a way to bridge some of those differences, or do you think that there's too much light?
Well, we consider the meeting in itself and the leaders meeting together is at least a step toward the success. But it should be driven by their willingness. It cannot be driven by force. And we need the good intention. We need them to really prioritize what are the needs for this needless crisis. Even the Secretary of State has mentioned that this is unnecessarily crisis being created out of this stable region. Any light can be seen at the end of the tunnel if we are agreeing on the principles that all the countries are equal. There is no difference between the big and the small country. All the countries enjoys the same rights and obliged to fulfill the same responsibilities. And new principles would govern this relationship between all the countries. We cannot go back before the 5th of June with the same nature of relationship. There is a lot of trust being lost throughout this crisis. And we hope that will be restored one day, but needs a lot of time to be rebuilt again.
And do you see kind of now looking at, have you mentioned a mechanism for kind of a degree of monitoring and kind of accountability to rebuild those principles? Do you think at the moment that the United States is that, and with the Secretary of State has been quite active in mediation, that there's a moment for more enhanced U.S. leadership in bringing the parties to the table for such a mechanism? Because it strikes me at times that frankly, as much as the Emir of Kuwait has made many efforts, that those have not always been that received in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. And there's a point, I think many kind of increasingly see it as kind of a deadlock. And to kind of break that, you see this as a potential opportunity for Washington or for maybe Doha to propose kind of a set of those principles to bring.
Well, definitely the intervention of the United States will make a big difference, and especially when it comes from the highest level by the president himself, who expressed his commitment to see an end for this crisis. And he always called for a united Gulf country. Whenever he has a phone conversation or a meeting with the Emir, he always stressed on the importance of the Gulf countries to come back together. And what also we believe in, that we need to start a just and fair process. And the Secretary of State, who was visiting the region earlier at the crisis, he started to propose some good proposals which are can become a baseline for a further negotiation. And Qatar was very responsive to those proposals, and we sent back our amendment and what we thought about. But the same thing, if it's ignored by the other side, we cannot do anything. We cannot have any breakthrough without them.
And kind of looking at the state of the U.S. relationship, I think there's certainly been criticism by members of Congress to a letter to Nikki Haley about the state of the MOU, and certainly to agree that the MOU is not public. But there's also been kind of a view in some quarters of Congress and others that, has the MOU done enough? Has it gone far enough? I think the State Department certainly has publicly been supportive of it, but for the broader kind of American public and those who were not part of those negotiations, like, is there any way to shed some light on what is the MOU and where it's headed? Is this a first step? Will there be additional steps taken to address issues on terrorism financing and mechanisms?
First of all, to set the record clear, the MOU which was signed between Qatar and the United States was just part of the outcomes of the president's visit to the GCC and the meeting between Qatar and the other GCC country. Qatar, the first country which signed into this process, and this process objective is to build capacity within the countries of the GCC, starting a monitoring mechanism to handle terrorism financing, and also to develop the regulatory framework for the charities work. And the MOU established very clear and very transparent plan with milestone, which is achieved by time frame and by everything. And I believe that there are some of the members of the Congress already been, they have looked at it, and they know the progress we have achieved in this. And also there is a very clear and straightforward recognition by the State Department and by the other departments of the progress in the counterterrorism front. And there is a clear statement that Qatar and the United States are partners in the fight against terror, and we provided a lot in this fight. It's not only in the terrorism financing front, but even in the military aspect of it.
And do you see that then as kind of at the state of the, will you do in, say, 6 months kind of a temperature check on the progress that was made so far in the MOU, and then is there a discussion to further enhance that? Or do you think that currently the steps that have been taken so far from both Washington and Doha to kind of address some of the issues that, and certainly some have been largely raised in the media, but kind of to address that from that step, or is this a beginning framework? Or
the MOU is an ongoing process. It's not something which has just a milestone and then we will stop the cooperation. So there are some issues which can be translated to a milestone can be achieved, but there are other issues which are continuous process and continuous coordination, which we already have with the United States. And we have like a periodic joint review between Qatar and the United States, which is, I think, every 3 months. I'm not so familiar with the time frame of it, but so the US and the Qatari task force are meeting together and reviewing the progress, and everything is progressing very well, and some of the items are ahead of schedules already.
I think it's often been noted that Qatar was the first country to sign an MOU on that, and there's still other GCC members have not. Is the ideal path to eventually try to interlink to get Kuwait, the UAE, Saudi to also agree to those similar standards or on those benchmarks to try to, because it strikes me that a lot of the terrorism finance issues are frankly not just defined by borders, but more kind of as a trans-regional challenge. And
well, it's a challenge everywhere, not only in Qatar and not only in the GCC countries, but even elsewhere. And the evolution of this phenomenon of terrorism has been very rapid, especially in the last few years. So most of the legislations and the capabilities within those countries couldn't keep up with this evolution. Regarding the GCC and the framework of the GCC and its relation with the MOU, actually it was part of our agreement as GCC countries, along with the United States, to enhance and develop our capabilities in terrorism and countering terrorism financing in partnership with the United States, and each country should carry out this bilaterally. And Qatar started this right away after the meeting. The other countries, they have to join, and I don't know what's their status until now.
so looking at a few regional issues and then kind of open it some to the audience, and one to kind of look at is Iran has taken a strong position in support of Qatar against Saudi Arabia and the UAE. What are the larger implications of a stronger relationship with Tehran at the moment?
Well, first we need to understand the geography of the region. If you look at Qatar map, we have one land border which is via Saudi Arabia, and it's been blockaded on the 5th of June without even any notification before that. So it is the only way to supply the food and medicine and the other supplies for the country. From the eastern side, we have UAE, and we have this territorial water which we are sharing together, and the skies, which is the territorial skies for UAE. And from the other side, you have Bahrain. Iran is the only path forward from the north. Qatar is sharing borders with Iran, is sharing our largest gas field with Iran. So for sure we will have this communication. After the blockade, the only way forward for our planes and for our ships to bring the supplies for our people, the food supplies, the medicine supplies, it's just via Iran. We don't have any other access to bring our stuff from. This doesn't mean that we have an agreement with Iran or Qatar is closer with Iran policies. This is never the case for us. We always distinguish between the economic relation and the political relationship. We comply with the international law. In politics, we disagree with Iran policies in many places. Qatar, when it comes to Qatar's policy in Syria, we are on the other side of the equation. When it comes to Qatar policy in Iraq, we are on the other side. When it comes to Qatar policy in Yemen, we are on the other side. But the way forward to overcome these challenges is not in the battlefield, is not by confrontation. We are sitting together in one region. We have to reach an understanding that each other we should respect each other's sovereignty. We should we should agree on common principles of security and coexistence. That no one is interfering in the other country's affairs. That no one launch any hostility against any other country. We don't believe that those proxies should continue, and the people of those vulnerable countries, they are the one who are going to pay the price. So we believe in dialogue, and that's why always the channels of dialogue need to be opened.
And kind of looking at kind of the broader kind of the President Trump's kind of statements on pushing back Iran and kind of a more enhanced regional strategy. Do you see, like, on Qatar, certainly it's with Doha, with CENTCOM, and having one of the largest military bases in the region, that in light of kind of some of Doha's geopolitical realities and dealing with the Iranian proxies, vis-a-vis in Syria and Iraq or Lebanon or Yemen, that at the moment that the steps to kind of to build off of the president's kind of visit to Riyadh last year, that there are some tangible areas where during your visit that you see as opportunities to kind of make progress and kind of on decreasing the behavior of Iran's proxies in the region, or is it
The only way forward will be a political solution. There is no military solution for any conflict in the region. If you will look at what's happening in those proxies areas like Yemen, what is the price the people of Yemen are paying right now? There are more than 20 million people are in need, and they are suffering from starvation. Syria, more than 500,000 being killed in Syria. Iraq now is the stability start to be restored after Daesh, and a lot of people has been displaced, living as refugees. They are suffering from security issues. We are not the one who are paying the prices of those proxies. The people of Iraq, the people of Yemen, the people of Syria. Do they deserve that we continue this war and this pressure on them until we achieve objective in order to bring Iran to the table at the end and solve the issue? They don't deserve it. I think we need to stop everything right now and to agree on the principles that everybody should adhere to. At the end, we will resort to dialogue. Let us cut the way short and start by the dialogue.
Do you see that at the moment any space for political dialogue on Yemen?
Yeah, of course. There will always be a space for political dialogue. This is what Qatar believes. Qatar believes that everybody should be forced to dialogue. We should stop supporting anyone who is just want to fuel a fire and to fuel a war. This is something we have seen now. The results of the last few years. The results are awful in the region. It's a catastrophic situation in our region. Our region is rich. Our region has a lot of resources. And our biggest problem is security. Our people are feeling insecure. And now, with all these wars, we didn't see any positive progress out of it. We've just seen terrorism movement moving around in the countries. More chaos means more terrorists. More chaos means more people in need. More chaos means that those countries will take longer time to have to rebuild themselves again and to become countries again.
Kind of looking at more broadly, it was announced in recent days that Turkey is expanding its military commitment to Qatar. And certainly there's been a number of bilateral visits between Ankara and Doha. Like, how do you kind of see the direction of your relationship with Doha? Do you see that, and what Erdogan's intentions are in this relationship?
First of all, Turkey is an important country in our region. It has very strategic location. It is a world player. It's a member of the NATO, and it's the second largest force in the NATO. So it's within the pack of the allies of Qatar as well. And also, if you will look at the bilateral relationship between Qatar and Turkey, we have a lot of common interests together. We have a strong strategic relationship. Turkey stood with Qatar during this crisis when it comes to supplies, when it comes to whatever support we have requested from them. And we have very good relationship when it comes to defense and to economic relationship. There is, whatever they are announcing about the military deployment, the Turkish military deployment in Qatar, it's nothing related to the security situation of the region. This is a defense cooperation agreement which Qatar signed way before any crisis. We have signed it in 2014, end of 2014, December 2014. And it's the same agreement also allowing the Qatari forces to be in Anjarlik and to participate in the fight against Daesh there. And the same agreement is allowing them to use our bases also to contribute to the coalition. And adding to this, the bilateral defense relationship between the countries.
I think kind of a final question on regional issues is more looking at your relationship with Moscow and with President Putin. The kind of announcement or the press reporting of a potential sale of the S-400 system to Doha, and how potential complications that could prove to have with CENTCOM and also under U.S. Treasury sanction law. Like, is there a certain area of like, is the value of a potential S-400 system a potential defensive measure against, in light of the current regional environment, or is this still kind of how, because of this balancing as Qatar navigates a relationship with Washington, but also with Moscow and others, or is it being overly read into the new, if this is more speculation than a sale?
There is nothing solid yet, and what I can assure you that Qatar always ensuring the compliance with the international law and also with the sanctions system here, the sanction regime in the United States. So we are taking everything in consideration. We have a very strong relationship with the United States, and we have also a relationship with other countries, but nothing yet, I mean, in terms of signing a deal or no.
So I do think there's a degree of a kind of a concern, certainly in Washington, about President Putin's own intentions in the region, which don't frankly always align with what the United States would like to do, and also kind of in other Gulf allies, that like in terms of building regional cooperation, address issues like Syria and others. And I imagine there are quite a number of differences between Doha and Damascus and Moscow on Syria and other issues that so it does not create an environment where
as long as the conflicts in the region continuing, everybody will have an interest in the region, and everybody will have his own interest and different interests. So that's why we need to call for a genuine security dialogue between different countries and different forces in the region. Let us reach an understanding that keeping all the other interests aside and think about the interest of the people. If we are just going to think about which country is going to influence which country, we will never achieve any result.
And so I think I'll open to questions for the... Yep.
I'm Gardner Harris from the New York Times. You seem to be having a moment in Washington, D.C. Right now with the Trump administration, particularly your meetings, 2x2 meetings this week, lots of positive statements from both Tillerson and Mattis. Why is that? Why have you been able to succeed over the last few months in this spat with your rivals at the GCC, and do you see the tide turning in Washington in your favor?
Thank you. First of all, our relation and our partnership with the United States has been always very strong and strategic partnership. And we see that we don't consider what we have achieved now with the United States as something directed to our Gulf neighbors, or to it is a winning situation in the Gulf crisis or a losing situation for the other side in the Gulf crisis. We see that everybody is a loser from this crisis. We see that there is no winner. Our people in the Gulf, they lost a lot from this, from what we call a needless crisis. What we have built throughout the year a partnership based on a trust, based on a transparency. We have been a strong ally with the United States, and the US is recognizing this alliance and upgrading it to a higher level, which is the strategic level we have right now. And we are using this opportunity as a platform to consolidate all our efforts under one coordinated umbrella, and we are trying to elevate this and try to intensify this cooperation.
Oh.
Good morning. Ali Al-Ahmed, the director of the Gulf Institute. My question is about Oman. The fact that Oman and Kuwait, mostly Oman, has been basically taking a neutral role in this conflict, and Oman is facing some issue with employment. Are you planning to invest in Omani? You have a lot of investment around the world. Is Oman one of your places where it's a very nice investment area? So is that something that you're thinking of in terms of helping Oman with its economic issues as well?
Oman, we have very strong relationship with Oman, and we have already a well-established investments there. And this investment is continuing and growing. We have investments in the real estates, we have investments in the infrastructure, we have investments in manufacturing, and also now we have a joint investments with Italy in the energy sector there in Oman. So our investment plan there is big, is not something small. It's considered a big portion of our investment. And also our plans in the future is to expand.
Josh? The back.
Thank you so much. Josh Rogan, Washington Post. Thank you for your time today. According to the readout of President Trump's recent call with your emir, the White House said the president thanked the emir for action to counter terrorism and extremism in all forms, including being one of the few countries to move forward on a bilateral memorandum of understanding. As you know, there have been some criticism from the U.S. Congress, in both parties actually, about this memorandum of understanding. Congressmen allege that it's not tough enough, and they also criticize the fact that it has been held in secret. They question whether or not your country has actually taken steps to combat terrorist financing. Can you tell us some details about the steps that you've taken, and can you comment on whether or not you believe this memorandum of understanding should remain secret? Thank you.
The confidentiality of the memorandum, this is something related to the U.S. government, and I don't know what's the nature of the relationship between the executive arm and the legislative arm, but from my meetings with some of the congressmen, I had to know that they have seen the memorandum, and there are some of them, they reported to them what is the progress on it. For us, as I just mentioned to Andrew here, that the memorandum is an ongoing process, and it's something which came out as a result of the meeting between the U.S., United States, and the GCC, and not only Qatar is the country which obliged to sign such an MOU, but all the other countries are obliged to do the same. How tough or it's easy or it's enough or it's not enough, all the U.S. agencies, they are confirming and recognizing the efforts and the partnership the U.S. have with Qatar in the countering terrorism and countering terrorism financing. We don't want to be caught by the propaganda created from outside for regional purposes, and they are trying to just to fuel it here for their regional purpose, but it will affect the national interest of the United States. We have seen that this propaganda war is fueled by countries which are considered Qatar as their opponent. And they are trying to use all the means here just to change this image of Qatar and create this kind of misperception. Our role is reaching out to the people, reaching out to the Congress, and clarifying for them the situation. Qatar has been a cooperative and helpful ally for the United States for the last decades. It's not something new, and the US government knows this and recognizes this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amir Tibon, Haaretz newspaper, Israel. There's been a recent wave of meetings, visits by Jewish American leaders with the Emir and other leaders of Qatar. And each and every one of them, after those meetings, said that they asked the leadership of Qatar to change the coverage of Al Jazeera towards Israel and the Palestinian issue. Has Qatar given any assurances in those meetings that there will be a change in Al Jazeera's coverage of this issue?
Well, regarding the visits of different parties from the US societies are coming to Qatar and visiting us, we don't distinguish between religion background or ethnicity background. All of them, they are welcomed, and we are building a good relation with them. Regarding Al Jazeera coverage, in Qatar Constitution, it's very clear that the government should not interfere in the media. But Al Jazeera also should comply with the international standards and with any code of conduct. And there are a clear mechanism. If there is anyone is complaining about Al Jazeera coverage that's been promoting hatred speech or inciting, they can go and file this complaints in different bodies which are governing the media outlets, and he will get a just result out of it. In fact, there are some complaints being filed against Al Jazeera at the Ofcom in the United Kingdom, and it's proved that Al Jazeera, they followed the professional standards. We are not questioning the content of Al Jazeera. We question the professionality of Al Jazeera through a clear mechanism.
Yes.
Thank you, Rahim Rashidi from Kurdistan TV. What do you think of the Turkey's operation in Afrin? And what is your opinion about the Peshmerga role in fight against ISIS and terrorism? Thank you.
Peshmerga played a vital role in the fight against ISIS and against terrorism there in Iraq. And we see that they have good soldiers who are fighting terrorism, and they are committed to the security of their country. But also, we need to look at Turkey security, also national security issue, which is affected by some of the movement which is affecting directly the security of Turkey. And Qatar supporting any country which will take care of to protect their own national security. What's happening in Afrin is done by coordination with the other forces there, with the other allies, and they are trying to protect their borders. And I think this is the right of any country to protect its borders.
Thank you. I'm Mike Haltzel from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. It seems to me that the central point of your talk today was Qatar's strong stance against terrorism. Can we take that to mean that you unequivocally oppose all non-state groups that espouse terrorism and actively carry out terrorism in pursuit of their goals, such as Hezbollah or other groups in your region?
We denounce any non-state actor who commit violence against the civilians. The Terrorism Act in itself is denounced and condemned by the state of Qatar, and this is very clear policy for us. we don't distinguish between those non-state actors, whether they are Sunni or Shia, Muslim or non-Muslim. It's for us, we judge the act, we judge the behavior, we don't judge the background of the people.
Thank you. I'm Philip Cornell from the Atlantic Council. The blockade has obviously had an impact on the economy of Qatar. It's come at a time also of slumping gas prices. And the result is 3 years of deficit. At the same time, I mean, the Dolphin pipeline, for example, stays open. The economy is set to grow next year. My question is, how sustainable from an economic point of view is the current status of the blockade, or is it a ticking clock? And are there any specific measures of escalation or tightening of screws that you could see that might impact that clock in terms of the sustainability of the economy? Thanks.
Well, regarding the resilience of our economy, the country can survive forever with the current resources. We are blessed with natural resources, but also we are having a good management for those resources. And the blockade, when it has an impact on the economic situation, it has the shock impact, which is the first few days or a few weeks from the measure they have taken. But the problem doesn't lie there. It lies where the other countries, the blockading states, tries to and attempt to manipulate the market, to create fake news and fake stories about the economic situation, trying to create this propaganda in order to distress the economy. And those factors are unacceptable by the international law and it's undermining the world economic order. But these the sort of things which can have, we are resisting all these moves, but it's like a disturbing ongoing factor. What we are seeking for, that everybody just stay away on his own way until they reach to a way forward for a solution. And we don't see that there is any risk of aggression. The only thing we see, the only provocation we see is the market manipulations.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Wajd Waqfi. I'm with Al Jazeera Television, and I say it proudly. معالي الوزير, well, let me ask you this in English, and you're free to answer whether it's in Arabic or English. Why is it that Qatar has not, until now, officially announced who was behind the hacking of the Qatar news agency that caused this whole crisis?
Well, it's a legal process. I'm not aware exactly where they have reached in the legal process, but until now we cannot disclose the information who exactly was behind the hack, and I don't want to really undermine this process because it's taken its own way.
I think I would take one final question, but then after that I would ask you all to remain seated so that the minister can go to his next appointment. And so I would, yes.
Thank you. Omar Nidawi, Iraq analyst with Griffin Partners. My question is about Iraq. The fragmentation of Sunni political leadership in Iraq has been seen as an obstacle to stability, to political stability in the country. And as the country goes to elections in a few months, what initiatives, if any, does Qatar have to try and create a unified Sunni political leadership or vision for the future? Thank you.
Well, we always encourage the Iraqi people to build their political affiliation based on their national identity, not based on their sects or their ethnicity. Unfortunately, what we are seeing right now, that there are Shia leaders, Sunni leaders, Kurds, and Yazidis, or from different backgrounds and different sects. We don't like to interfere in having like one Sunni front. this is not Qatar policy, and we encourage everybody to come along based on a national agenda. We talk to Sunni leaders, we talk to Shia leaders, we talk to different politicians to have a united front among them with a common national interest, that Iraq should remain together, that the integrity of Iraq shouldn't be undermined, and to stay together for a better future. But just fueling and labeling this Sunni pack or Shia pack, I don't think this will be fruitful for the Iraqi people themselves.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Hope to host you in the future and better times.
Thank you very much. Thank you.